Every second you stand on Mars, you are being shot, not with bullets, with particles, subatomic projectiles traveling at nearly the speed of light, punching through your skin, through your muscles, through your bones, through your DNA. You cannot see them. You cannot feel them. But they are destroying you, cell by cell, strand by strand, mutation by mutation. Mars radiation does not announce itself. It does not hurt. It simply kills you slowly, and there is nothing you can do about it. This is not a theoretical concern. This is not a problem waiting for a technological solution. NASA knows this. Every space agency on Earth knows this. The data is unambiguous. The measurements are precise. The Curiosity rover has been measuring radiation on the Martian surface since 2012. The numbers tell a story that no Mars colonization advocate wants to hear. The story is simple. Mars radiation will kill every colony. Not might kill. Will kill. The radiation environment on Mars is incompatible with long-term human habitation. The doses are too high, the shielding requirements are too extreme, the biological damage is too relentless, and the physics that creates this radiation cannot be negotiated with, cannot be out-engineered, cannot be overcome. This is not hyperbole. This is the measured, quantified, peer-reviewed conclusion of radiation physicists and space medicine researchers who have spent careers studying this exact question. The consensus is clear. Without revolutionary advances in radiation protection that currently exist nowhere in physics or engineering, permanent human settlement on Mars is biologically untenable. Brian Cox has spent decades explaining the physics of the cosmos. He understands radiation. He understands what happens when high-energy particles interact with biological tissue. He understands the fundamental constraints that make Mars a death trap for any unprotected human. And he has been clear about the implications. The radiation problem is not one problem. It is a cascade of problems, each reinforcing the others, each closing another door on the dream of permanent human settlement. Let me show you exactly what the radiation environment on Mars looks like. Let me walk through the numbers, the biology, the engineering, and the mathematics. Let me demonstrate why NASA's own scientists consider radiation one of the most formidable barriers to human Mars exploration, let alone colonization. The physics is devastating. The biology is worse. Start with understanding where the radiation comes from. There are two primary sources, and both are relentless. The first source is galactic cosmic rays. These are the heavyweights of space radiation. Galactic cosmic rays are atomic nuclei, atoms stripped of their electrons, accelerated to enormous energies by supernovae, neutron star collisions, and other violent events scattered across the galaxy. They have been traveling for millions of years. They come from every direction, they never stop. The energy of galactic cosmic rays is extraordinary. A single cosmic ray particle can carry the kinetic energy of a baseball thrown at professional speed. That energy is concentrated into a single atomic nucleus. When this nucleus hits biological tissue, it does not merely bump into molecules. It tears through them, leaving a trail of broken chemical bonds, shattered DNA, and damaged cellular machinery. The most damaging galactic cosmic rays are heavy ions, nuclei of elements like iron, silicon, and carbon. These are called Hz particles for high atomic number and high energy. An iron nucleus traveling at 90% of the speed of light carries enough energy to damage thousands of cells along its path through tissue. A single Hz particle can create a column of destruction several cells wide and many centimeters long. These particles are rare compared to protons, which make up the majority of cosmic rays. But their biological impact is disproportionate. A single iron ion does more damage per unit length of tissue than hundreds of protons. Radiation biologists use a quantity called relative biological effectiveness to measure this. Hz particles have an effectiveness 20 to 40 times higher than gamma rays for causing biological damage. They are the heavy artillery of the cosmic radiation environment. On Earth, we are almost completely shielded from galactic cosmic rays. Our atmosphere provides the equivalent of about 10 meters of water above our heads. Our magnetic field deflects many charged particles before they reach the atmosphere. The combined protection reduces the cosmic ray dose at sea level to a tiny fraction of what exists in space. This protection is so effective that most people never think about cosmic radiation. We live our entire lives bathed in a gentle rain of particles from space. And the dose is so small it is essentially harmless. About 0.4 millisieverts per year comes from cosmic radiation at sea level. At higher altitudes, the dose increases because there is less atmosphere above you. Airline pilots receive higher doses. People living in high-altitude cities like La Paz or Lhasa receive modestly higher doses, but these variations are tiny compared to what Mars delivers. Mars has neither adequate protection. Its atmosphere provides the equivalent of about 16 to 20 centimeters of water shielding. Compare that to Earth's 10 meters. Mars offers roughly 1 to 2% of Earth's atmospheric shielding, and Mars has no global magnetic field at all. The cosmic rays stream directly to the surface, barely attenuated, delivering their full destructive energy to anything exposed. The second source of radiation is solar particle events. The Sunday periodically erupts, releasing enormous bursts of energetic particles. Solar flares and coronal mass ejections can accelerate protons and other particles to high energies, creating waves of radiation that wash across the inner solar system. Solar particle events are sporadic, but potentially devastating. A major event can deliver a radiation dose in hours that would normally accumulate over months. During the solar maximum, when the Sunday is most active, these events occur more frequently. During the 1972 solar event, between the Apollo 16 and 17 missions, the radiation dose would have been potentially lethal to any astronaut on the lunar surface. On Earth, our magnetic field provides the primary protection against solar particle events. The magnetosphere deflects most solar particles around the planet. Only at the poles, where the field lines funnel downward, do significant numbers of particles reach the upper atmosphere, producing the aurora. Mars has no such protection. When a solar particle event hits Mars, the particles reach the surface. The thin atmosphere provides minimal shielding. A colonist on Mars during a major solar event would receive a massive dose of radiation with essentially no warning and no natural protection. The lack of warning is critical. On Earth, space weather monitoring systems can detect solar events and issue warnings. People can shelter. Systems can be protected. On Mars, the warning time would be limited. Light from the Sunday reaches Mars in roughly 12 minutes on average. Solar particles travel slower than light, but can still arrive within minutes to hours of a flare. A colonist caught on the surface during an excursion when a major solar event occurs would need to reach shelter within minutes to avoid a potentially lethal dose. If they are kilometers from the habitat, conducting maintenance or exploration, they might not make it. A single solar particle event could kill exposed colonists outright. And the radiation exposure does not begin on Mars. It begins on the journey there. The transit from Earth to Mars takes approximately 7 to 9 months. During this time, astronauts would be exposed to the full interplanetary radiation environment inside a spacecraft that provides minimal shielding. The Curiosity rover measured radiation during its transit to Mars. The dose was approximately 331 millisieverts for the roughly 8.5-month journey. That is more than the annual dose from the Martian surface. By the time colonists arrive on Mars, they would have already accumulated a significant radiation dose. Their DNA would already be damaged. Their cellular repair systems would already be stressed. They would start their life on Mars already degraded, and the degradation would only accelerate. Now, let me translate these radiation sources into actual numbers. What dose does the Martian surface deliver? The Curiosity rover's radiation assessment detector has measured the surface radiation dose at approximately 0.67 millisieverts. Per Dalton Y, that translates to roughly 243 millisieverts per year. For reference, the annual radiation dose limit for nuclear industry workers on Earth is 50 millisieverts per year. The general public limit is 1 millisievert per year. Let me give these numbers some additional context. A single chest X-ray delivers about 0.1 millisieverts. Living on Mars for one day delivers the equivalent of roughly 7 chest X-rays every day. A CT scan of the chest delivers about 7 millisieverts. A Mars colonist accumulates a chest CT worth of radiation roughly every 10 days, just by existing. And these measurements represent average conditions. The actual dose varies with solar activity. During solar minimum, when the Sunday's magnetic field is weakest, more galactic cosmic rays reach the inner solar system, and the surface dose increases. During solar maximum, the galactic cosmic ray dose decreases, but is replaced by solar particle events that can deliver large acute doses. There is no good time to be on Mars. The radiation is always present. Only the type varies. The measurements also show significant variation with atmospheric conditions. When Mars has dust storms, the additional atmospheric mass provides slightly more shielding, reducing the surface dose by a few %. But dust storms bring their own problems, blocking sunlight needed for solar power and agriculture, depositing toxic dust on surfaces, and creating navigation hazards. A Mars colonist would receive nearly 5 times the dose allowed for nuclear workers, nearly 250 times the dose considered safe for the general public. Every year, year after year after year, there is no off switch. There is no vacation from the radiation. As long as you are on Mars, you are accumulating dose. Brian Cox has emphasized the relentless nature of this exposure. Radiation damage is cumulative. Every particle that hits your DNA adds to the total damage. Your body has repair mechanisms, but they are not perfect. Some damage escapes repair. Some repairs introduce new errors. Over time, the accumulated damage overwhelms the body's ability to cope. What does this radiation actually do to the human body? Let me walk through the biology, system by system. Cancer is the most obvious consequence. Radiation causes cancer by damaging DNA. When a cell's DNA is damaged and the damage is repaired incorrectly, the cell can begin dividing uncontrollably. This is cancer. The relationship between radiation dose and cancer risk is well established. It is approximately linear at the doses we are discussing. More dose means more cancer. The mechanism is well understood. A high-energy particle passing through a cell nucleus can cause double-strand breaks in DNA. These are the most dangerous type of DNA damage, because both strands of the double helix are severed. The cell attempts to repair these breaks, but the repair is often imperfect. Segments are deleted, inverted, or joined incorrectly. These errors can activate oncogenes or deactivate tumor suppressor genes, initiating the cascade toward cancer. HZ particles are particularly dangerous because they create clustered damage. When an iron nucleus at relativistic speed passes through DNA, it does not create a single break. It creates dozens of breaks in a small region, overwhelming the cell's repair capacity. This clustered damage is qualitatively different from the scattered damage caused by lower energy radiation. It is harder to repair and more likely to lead to cancer. NASA has established a career exposure limit for astronauts based on cancer risk. The limit is set so that an astronaut's lifetime cancer risk does not increase by more than 3% above baseline. On Mars, this limit would be reached in approximately 18 months to 2 years, depending on the individual's age and sex. 18 months. That is not a colony, that is a visit. A brief, dangerous visit after which the astronaut must return to Earth and never go back. A permanent colony would mean permanent exposure, which would mean cancer rates far exceeding anything acceptable. Within a decade, a significant fraction of colonists would develop cancer. Within 2 decades, the majority would, and these are conservative estimates. They are based on the background radiation level. They do not account for solar particle events, which could deliver additional large doses. A single major solar event could push dozens of colonists past their lifetime risk thresholds in hours. But cancer is not the only problem. In some ways, it is not even the most concerning problem. Recent research has revealed that space radiation causes neurological damage that might be more immediately threatening than cancer. Studies at NASA's Space Radiation Laboratory at Brookhaven National Laboratory have exposed mice to radiation simulating the galactic cosmic ray environment. The results are alarming. Mice exposed to HZ particles show significant neurological changes. They develop cognitive impairment, reduced learning ability, increased anxiety, and degraded memory. The damage is visible in their brain tissue, reduced density of dendritic connections between neurons, inflammation, and structural changes. The research team led by Charles Lamolli at the University of California, Irvine, has been particularly prolific in documenting these effects. Their work shows that even relatively low doses of HZ radiation can prune dendritic spines, the tiny protrusions on neurons that form the basis of synaptic connections. With fewer connections between neurons, cognitive function degrades, learning becomes harder, problem-solving becomes slower, creativity diminishes. The damage appears to be permanent. Unlike some forms of brain injury where neural plasticity can compensate, the radiation-induced loss of dendritic spines does not recover over time. The mice do not get better. The damage accumulates, and there is no currently known treatment that can reverse it. More recent studies have shown that space radiation also triggers neuroinflammation, a chronic inflammatory response in the brain. This inflammation persists long after exposure and contributes to ongoing neuronal damage. It is similar to the neuroinflammation seen in neurodegenerative diseases, like Alzheimer's. Radiation on Mars might effectively accelerate the aging of the brain. These effects appear at doses comparable to what Mars colonists would receive over 1 to 2 years. The implication is stark. Mars radiation would not just give you cancer eventually. It would damage your brain now. Colonists might experience cognitive decline, memory problems, difficulty with decision-making, and personality changes within the first years of their stay. Think about what this means for a colony. Your engineers need to solve complex problems. Your doctors need to make critical decisions. Your leaders need to manage a community under extreme stress. And all of them are experiencing progressive brain damage from the moment they arrive. Cox has discussed these findings with characteristic directness. The neurological effects of space radiation may be the true showstopper for Mars colonization. Cancer can be treated, at least sometimes. Cognitive decline cannot be reversed. A colony of people with progressively impaired judgment is a colony that will make increasingly poor decisions. Decisions that could be fatal in an environment that permits no mistakes. There is another biological effect that deserves attention. Radiation damages the cardiovascular system. Studies of astronauts who traveled beyond low Earth orbit during the Apollo program show higher rates of cardiovascular disease. The sample size is small, but the data is suggestive. Space radiation may accelerate atherosclerosis and damage blood vessel walls. On Mars, colonists would accumulate cardiovascular radiation damage year after year. Heart disease, stroke, and circulatory problems would add to the cancer and neurological burdens. The human body would be under assault from every direction, every system degrading simultaneously. Radiation also damages the immune system. Exposure to space radiation reduces the effectiveness of immune cells. A colonist with a suppressed immune system is more vulnerable to infection, less able to heal wounds, less capable of fighting cancer cells that arise. The radiation creates vulnerability, and the vulnerability makes everything else worse. There is another effect that is often overlooked. Cataract space radiation is known to accelerate cataract formation. Apollo astronauts who traveled beyond low Earth orbit showed higher rates of cataracts than their peers who remained in low orbit. On Mars, with continuous radiation exposure over years, cataracts would develop earlier and progress faster. In a colony with limited medical capabilities, this could leave colonists visually impaired with no effective treatment. Radiation also causes damage at the genetic level that extends beyond the individual. Mutations in germ cells, sperm, and eggs can be passed to offspring. A colonist whose reproductive cells have been damaged by years of radiation exposure would pass those mutations to their children. Over generations, the genetic burden on a Mars population would increase steadily. This is particularly concerning for a small, isolated population. Without the genetic diversity of a large population and without the low mutation rate of an Earth environment, a Mars colony would face accelerating genetic degradation. Each generation would carry more mutations than the last. Genetic diseases would become more common. The population's fitness would decline over time rather than improve. Brian Cox has noted that this multi-generational problem might be the most devastating argument against permanent Mars settlement. A colony is not just about the first generation, it is about the 10th generation and the 100th. And radiation ensures that each subsequent generation is genetically worse off than the one before. Now, let me address the obvious question. Can we shield against this radiation? Can we build structures on Mars that protect colonists from the cosmic bombardment? The short answer is, partially, with enormous difficulty, at staggering cost, and never completely. Let me explain why. Shielding against radiation works by putting mass between you and the radiation source. The more mass, the more particles are absorbed before reaching you. On Earth, we have 10 meters of atmospheric mass above us plus a magnetic field. On Mars, we would need to provide equivalent protection artificially. The most commonly proposed shielding material is Martian regolith. The soil. You could pile regolith on top of your habitat or bury your habitat underground. Regolith is effective at stopping many types of radiation. Several meters of regolith would significantly reduce the radiation dose inside a habitat. But here is the critical problem. Galactic cosmic rays, particularly Hz particles, interact with shielding material in a dangerous way. When a high-energy particle hits a nucleus in the shielding material, it shatters that nucleus, producing a shower of secondary particles. These secondary particles, neutrons, protons, lighter ions, gamma rays, can be more biologically damaging than the original particle. This is called secondary radiation or spallation. It means that conventional shielding is a double-edged sword. Thin shielding can actually make the radiation environment worse by producing secondary particles without adequately stopping the primaries. You need very thick shielding to stop both the primary particles and the secondary shower. This is one of the most counterintuitive aspects of radiation shielding. Adding a little protection is worse than having none at all for the highest energy particles. A thin aluminum wall, the kind spacecraft are made of, actually increases the dose from galactic cosmic rays, because it produces secondary radiation without stopping the primaries. NASA has known this since the Apollo program. The optimal shielding materials are hydrogen, rich substances like polyethylene or water. Hydrogen is effective because its nucleus, a single proton, is similar in mass to neutrons and can absorb their energy efficiently through elastic collisions. But even hydrogen, rich shielding must be meters thick to significantly reduce the galactic cosmic ray dose. Researchers have explored advanced shielding concepts, electromagnetic shields that use powerful magnetic fields to deflect charged particles, similar to Earth's magnetosphere. But the field strengths required would be enormous. The power consumption would be extraordinary. The magnets would be massive, and even a perfect magnetic shield would not stop uncharged secondary particles like neutrons. Active shielding using electrostatic fields has also been proposed, charging the exterior of a habitat to repel incoming particles. But the voltages required to deflect galactic cosmic rays would be in the hundreds of millions of volts. No practical power system can generate and maintain such voltages continuously. The engineering is not merely difficult. It is beyond any foreseeable capability. How thick studies suggest that approximately 3 meters of regolith would reduce the radiation dose to roughly Earth. Level rates 3 meters of rock and soil above your head, around your walls everywhere. This is not a building. This is a bunker. This is living underground in a tomb of Martian dirt. Brian Cox has described this reality bluntly. A Mars colony would not look like the domed cities of science fiction. It would look like a network of underground tunnels. Colonists would live their entire lives beneath meters of soil, never seeing the sky, never walking on the surface for more than brief excursions. They would be moles, not pioneers. Some have proposed using lava tubes as natural shelters. Mars has lava tubes, underground tunnels created by ancient volcanic flows, that could theoretically provide natural radiation shielding. The rock above a lava tube could be tens of meters thick, more than enough to block most radiation. But lava tubes present their own challenges. They are geological features, not habitable spaces. They would need to be sealed against the near-vacuum Martian atmosphere. They would need to be pressurized. They would need heating, lighting, ventilation, water supply, and waste management systems installed. The structural integrity of a billions-year-old lava tube cannot be assumed. Collapses are possible, and the tubes are located where ancient volcanoes placed them, not necessarily where a colony would ideally be sited. Living underground, whether in constructed bunkers or adapted lava tubes, would impose severe psychological costs. Humans evolved in open environments. We need sunlight, not just for vitamin D, but for circadian regulation, for mood, for mental health. Seasonal affective disorder affects people who simply experience shorter days in winter. Imagine living in permanent artificial light, in enclosed underground spaces, for the rest of your life. Studies of people living in confined environments, submarine crews, Antarctic winter, over teams, long-duration space station expeditions, consistently show elevated rates of depression, interpersonal conflict, sleep disorders, and psychological distress. These studies involve durations of months to a year or two. A Mars colony would impose these conditions permanently, and even underground. The protection would not be complete. Some radiation would still penetrate. The highest energy cosmic rays can punch through meters of material. Secondary neutrons are particularly difficult to shield against, because they carry no charge and interact weakly with matter. There is no realistic amount of regolith that completely eliminates the radiation threat. What about water shielding? Water is more effective than regolith per unit mass at stopping certain types of radiation, particularly neutrons. Hydrogen-rich materials are better at absorbing neutron radiation, because hydrogen nuclei are similar in mass to neutrons, but water is heavy. Transporting enough water to shield a colony would be enormously expensive. Even using Martian water ice, you would need to mine, transport, and contain thousands of tons of water around your habitats. The engineering is feasible in principle but staggering in practice, and shielding only protects you when you are inside the shielded structure. Colonists would need to leave their habitats regularly. They would need to maintain equipment, conduct scientific research, build new structures, repair systems. Every moment outside the shielded habitat is a moment of full radiation exposure. Spacesuits provide almost no radiation shielding. The mass required for effective portable shielding would make the suit unwearable. An astronaut in a spacesuit on the Martian surface receives essentially the full surface radiation dose. There is no practical way to protect people who are outside. Now consider what a colony actually requires. Food production. If you are growing food in greenhouses on the surface, those greenhouses need to be shielded. But plants need light. You cannot bury a greenhouse under 3 meters of dirt. You could use artificial lighting, but that requires enormous energy. You could use fiber optics to pipe sunlight underground, but this adds complexity and failure points. If plants are exposed to Martian radiation levels, they suffer DNA damage just as humans do. Crop yields would be reduced. Mutations would accumulate. Food quality and nutritional content would degrade. You would be eating irradiated food grown in toxic perchlorate, contaminated soil under inadequate light, and you would depend on this food for survival. Studies of plant growth under simulated space radiation conditions show reduced germination rates, slower growth, smaller yields, and increased mutation rates. Leafy greens, which would be a staple of any Mars colony, are particularly sensitive to radiation damage. Root vegetables perform somewhat better, but still suffer significant yield reductions at Mars surface radiation levels. The food chain compounds the problem. Animals raised for protein on Mars, if any were included in the colony plan, would also suffer radiation damage. Their meat and eggs would contain damaged cells. The entire food web of a Mars colony would be irradiated, from the soil microbes needed for agriculture to the crops, to any livestock to the colonists themselves. Water management adds another layer of complexity. Water can be used for radiation shielding, but water used for shielding cannot simultaneously be used for drinking, agriculture, or industrial processes without careful management. A colony would face constant trade-offs between shielding and survival needs. Cox has highlighted this cascade of problems. Radiation does not just affect humans directly. It affects every system the colony depends on: food production, water systems, electronics, building materials. Nothing on Mars escapes the radiation environment. Electronics deserves special mention. Cosmic rays can cause single-event upsets in computer systems, flipping bits in memory, corrupting data, crashing processors on Earth. This is a minor nuisance, accounted for in system design. On Mars, with radiation levels 200 times higher, it becomes a serious operational challenge. Critical computer systems would need extensive radiation hardening, adding weight, cost, and complexity. Let me address the timeline for a colony. Imagine a group of 100 colonists arrives on Mars. They build or occupy pre-built underground habitats. They begin their life on Mars. Within the first year, every colonist has accumulated a radiation dose, roughly equivalent to what nuclear workers receive in 5 years. Their DNA repair systems are working overtime. The accumulated damage is not yet clinically apparent, but it is there, in every cell, in every strand of DNA. Within 5 years, the cancer risk has increased measurably. Some colonists, those who spent more time on surface operations, may already be developing early-stage cancers. Neurological effects are beginning to appear. Subtle changes in cognition, slight memory problems, increased irritability. These might be dismissed as stress, but they are radiation damage. Within 10 years, the first cancers are being diagnosed. The colony's medical facilities, limited by what could be transported from Earth, struggle to treat them. Some cancers can be managed, others cannot. The first radiation deaths begin. Within 20 years, cancer rates among the colonists are dramatically elevated. Neurological decline is widespread. Cardiovascular disease is more common than it should be for the age group. The colony's workforce is increasingly impaired. The people who were supposed to build a new civilization are instead fighting a losing battle against their own disintegrating biology. The medical infrastructure required to manage these conditions would be enormous. On Earth, cancer treatment requires hospitals, surgical suites, radiation therapy equipment. The irony is bitter. chemotherapy drugs, imaging systems, laboratories, and teams of specialized physicians transporting this infrastructure to Mars would be prohibitively expensive. Manufacturing it on Mars would require industrial capabilities that a small colony could not support. A colonist diagnosed with cancer on Mars would face a grim choice: limited treatment with whatever medical resources the colony possesses, or a 7-month journey back to Earth for proper treatment, accumulating more radiation during the transit. There would be no good option. The radiation creates the disease and the distance prevents the cure, and the diseases would not arrive one at a time. Multiple colonists would develop multiple conditions simultaneously. The colony's medical system would be overwhelmed. Healthy workers would need to spend increasing time caring for sick colleagues. Productivity would decline. Morale would collapse. The colony would enter a death spiral where radiation creates illness. Illness reduces capability. Reduced capability prevents maintenance and growth. And the colony slowly fails. And their children, if they have children, are worse off. Children are more sensitive to radiation than adults. Their rapidly dividing cells are more vulnerable to DNA damage. Developmental processes are more easily disrupted. Children born and raised on Mars would face higher cancer rates, more developmental abnormalities, and shorter life expectancies than their parents. This is not a colony. This is a slow-motion catastrophe, a community where every person is progressively sickened by an invisible, inescapable environmental hazard. A place where the simple act of existing shortens your life. NASA knows this. Their human research program has identified radiation as one of the top 5 risks for human spaceflight. Their reports are clear. Current countermeasures are insufficient to protect crew from the space radiation environment for long-duration missions. Some Mars advocates argue that medical advances will solve the radiation problem. Gene therapy might repair DNA damage. Cancer treatments might become more effective. Radioprotective drugs might reduce the biological impact of radiation exposure. Radioprotective drugs are perhaps the most promising near-term possibility. Amifostine and similar compounds can reduce radiation damage to certain tissues by scavenging free radicals. NASA has studied these drugs extensively. They provide modest protection, perhaps reducing the effective dose by 10 to 30%. But they have significant side effects, including nausea, vomiting, and drops in blood pressure. And they must be taken before exposure, requiring precise timing that is difficult with unpredictable solar events. A 30% reduction in dose is not enough. It extends the timeline before cancer risk becomes unacceptable, but it does not eliminate the problem. A colonist taking radioprotective drugs every day for decades would still accumulate dangerous doses, and the long-term effects of decades of daily radioprotective drug use are completely unknown. The cure might create its own diseases. These possibilities are real but speculative. We do not currently have gene therapy that can repair radiation damage in real time across an entire body. We do not have drugs that prevent the fundamental physics of high-energy particles breaking chemical bonds. And even if we develop such therapies, they would need to work perfectly, continuously for every person in the colony, for the entire duration of their lives. Brian Cox has noted that hoping for future medical breakthroughs to solve the radiation problem is not a plan. It is a wish. Plans are based on known capabilities. Wishes are based on optimism. You cannot build a colony on wishes. There is one more aspect of the radiation problem that deserves discussion: the psychological impact. Imagine knowing that every day you spend on Mars is shortening your life. Imagine knowing that every time you step outside your bunker, you are absorbing lethal energy. Imagine knowing that the headache you woke up with might be the first sign of a brain tumor caused by a cosmic ray that hit you months ago. This knowledge would be corrosive. It would create anxiety, depression, and hopelessness. Colonists would live with the constant awareness that their environment is killing them. This psychological burden would compound the physical effects, creating a community under relentless stress from both the radiation itself and the knowledge of what it is doing. Cox has reflected on the human dimensions of this problem. The radiation on Mars is not just a physics problem or a biology problem. It is a human problem. It affects bodies and minds and communities. It poisons not just cells but hopes. A colony where every person is slowly dying from environmental exposure is not a colony. It is a hospice. Let me be direct about what all of this means. Mars colonization, as currently envisioned, requires humans to live on a world where the radiation environment will give them cancer, damage their brains, weaken their hearts, suppress their immune systems, and harm their children. No amount of shielding eliminates the risk entirely. No medical technology currently exists to counteract the damage. No combination of engineering and biology solves the problem. The radiation problem is not one challenge among many. It is a fundamental incompatibility between human biology and the Martian environment. Our bodies evolved under the protection of Earth's atmosphere and magnetic field. Remove that protection, and the same cosmic forces that shape the universe destroy us. This does not mean we should not explore Mars. Robotic missions are invaluable. Short-duration human visits, carefully planned and radiation monitored, might be worth the risk for the scientific knowledge they yield. But permanent settlement, generations of humans living and dying on Mars, the radiation forbids it. The distinction between exploration and colonization is crucial and often deliberately blurred by Mars advocates. A 2-year scientific mission with carefully selected radiation, monitored astronauts who return to Earth, is fundamentally different from a permanent settlement where people are born, live, and die. The former is risky but potentially justifiable. The latter is a sentence to slow biological destruction. Consider the analogy with deep-sea exploration. We send submersibles to the ocean floor. Scientists spend hours or days at extreme depths, but no one proposes building permanent cities on the ocean floor. The environment is too hostile, the pressure too extreme, the engineering too demanding. We explore the deep ocean, we do not colonize it. Mars deserves the same honest assessment. Some argue that the radiation risk is acceptable because the alternative, humanity confined to a single planet, carries its own existential risk. An asteroid impact or other catastrophe could destroy Earth-based civilization. Therefore, they argue, we must accept the radiation costs of Mars colonization as insurance against extinction. But this argument fails on its own terms. A Mars colony riddled with cancer, cognitive decline, and genetic degradation is not a viable backup for humanity. It is not a thriving civilization that could carry on if Earth were lost. It is a struggling, sickening outpost that would likely fail within a few generations even without any external catastrophe. Radiation ensures that a Mars colony would be too fragile to serve as humanity's insurance policy. Brian Cox has said that the universe is not designed for human comfort. It is not designed for human ambition. It follows its own laws. And those laws include the existence of radiation that permeates interplanetary space. We can observe the universe, we can study it, we can marvel at it, but we cannot always live in it. The dream of Mars is a beautiful dream. The image of humans standing on another world, building a new civilization, extending our reach beyond Earth. It stirs something deep in us. It speaks to our restlessness, our curiosity, our refusal to accept limits. But the radiation is real. The physics is real. The biology is real. And what they tell us is that Mars will kill every colony, not through dramatic catastrophe, not through explosive failure, through the quiet, relentless accumulation of damage that begins the moment you arrive and never stops until you leave or die. This is not the narrative that sells tickets. This is not the story that launches companies or inspires investments. The story that sells is the story of triumph, of human ingenuity overcoming obstacles, of the frontier spirit conquering new worlds. But the frontier was never irradiated. The settlers of the American West did not face an invisible force that destroyed their DNA with every passing hour. Mars is not the frontier. Mars is something new, a place where the environment itself is weapon. NASA knows this. The research is published. The data is clear. The scientists who study space radiation are not optimistic about long-term human habitation on Mars. They publish their findings in careful scientific language, but the message is unmistakable. The radiation environment is a showstopper. We have one world where the radiation is survivable. One world where our biology functions as intended. One world where we can walk outside without being bombarded by galactic cosmic rays. That world is Earth. It is not a backup plan. It is the only plan. The radiation ensures this. Look up at Mars in the night sky. That red dot. It looks close. It looks inviting. It looks like a place we could go. But between that dot and us, between our dream and reality, stands a wall of invisible particles that our bodies cannot survive. The wall is permanent. The particles are eternal. And our biology is fragile. That is the truth about Mars colonization. That is what the radiation tells us. That is what NASA knows and what we must accept. Mars is not a second home. It is a beautiful, deadly desert, and the radiation will not let us stay.